I still remember that morning, the way the light filtered through the curtains, soft and gold, touching everything it could reach. It should have been the happiest day of my life. But happiness, I've learned, can be an illusion, a gentle wave that looks calm from afar, yet hides the storm beneath. I stood in front of the mirror, fixing the collar of my suit, my hands trembling just a little. The sound of laughter floated up from the garden, where the wedding guests had begun to gather. Everything looked perfect. The flowers, the music, even the air felt expensive. Ruby had made sure of that. She loved beauty. She loved perfection. And I loved her. Or maybe I loved the way she made me feel, seen, chosen, like I mattered in a world that usually looked past men like me. My name is Alex. I come from a simple life, a quiet apartment, a small car, dreams bigger than my wallet. My father, Micah, was nothing like that. He was the man who turned dust into gold. A billionaire. A legend in boardrooms. A ghost in our family dinners. He was the kind of man people admired from a distance. When he refused to bless my marriage, I thought it was just pride, or disappointment that his only son had chosen love over wealth. But I was wrong. He wasn't protecting his pride, he was protecting me, from a truth I couldn't yet see. I can still hear his voice, calm but firm, the night before the wedding. "Son," he said, "when a person hides something before the vows, it's not love they're protecting, it's themselves." I laughed it off, thinking he was just being cautious, maybe bitter. But when he looked at me, his eyes weren't angry. They were sad, the kind of sadness that comes from knowing too much. That was the last time we spoke before everything fell apart. Sometimes I wonder, if I had listened, if I had paused and looked deeper into Ruby's eyes that morning, would I have seen what he saw? Would I have noticed the quiet fear hiding behind her smile? The truth didn't come like thunder. It came quietly, in whispers, in glances, in moments that didn't feel right. And when it finally revealed itself, it broke more than just a promise. It broke the illusion I had built my life upon. This is the story of how love blinded me, how truth found me, and how silence, my father's silence, became my greatest teacher. I met Ruby on a rainy afternoon, the kind that paints the city gray and makes strangers share the same umbrella. I was running late for a meeting, drenched, frustrated, and holding a stack of soggy documents that used to be my presentation. She was standing under a glass awning, her red coat bright against the dull sky. She looked like warmth itself, confident, untouchable, yet somehow lost in thought. When I passed by, she smiled at me, that small, polite smile rich people give when they think they're being kind. But then I slipped. My shoes met a puddle, gravity took charge, and the entire world tilted sideways. My papers flew like white birds in the rain. Ruby laughed, not mockingly, but softly, like she hadn't laughed in a while. She helped me gather the wet sheets, her manicured fingers brushing against mine. I remember thinking her perfume smelled like rain on roses. "You okay?" she asked, her voice light. "Yeah," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Just my pride that's broken." She smiled again, and somehow that was the beginning. In the weeks that followed, our worlds collided in small, unexpected ways. I worked as an architect in a modest firm, good at my job, invisible in the crowd. She came from old money, the kind that doesn't flaunt itself but lingers in the way she spoke, the way she never looked at price tags. She told me she admired people who built things from scratch. I told her I admired people who stayed humble while having everything. It felt poetic then. Our first date wasn't fancy, a corner cafe with cracked tiles and a jukebox that skipped every few minutes. She ordered black coffee. I ordered tea. She talked about art, travel, and the weight of expectations. I talked about dreams that didn't yet have names. There was something about her, a quiet sadness that didn't match her laughter. I saw it in the way she looked out of windows, as if searching for something she'd lost a long time ago. But I didn't ask. I just listened, and she stayed. When I finally brought Ruby home to meet my father, I was nervous. My father, Micah, didn't give his approval easily. He was a man of precision. Everything in his world had a reason, a calculation. Our house, or rather his mansion, felt too big for conversations. The air always carried a quiet echo, like it was waiting for something meaningful to fill it. Ruby arrived in a silver car, perfectly dressed, her smile bright enough to outshine the chandeliers. My father stood by the fireplace, calm and unreadable as always. "So, this is Ruby," he said, shaking her hand. His tone was polite, but not warm. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Micah," she replied, her confidence unwavering. They spoke about business, art, charity. I watched the exchange like a student watching two languages he didn't understand. She was charming, and he was studying her. Later that night, when I asked him what he thought, he simply said, "She's interesting." That was all. No praise, no criticism. Just that one word, interesting, stretched with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. Over the next few months, Ruby and I grew closer. She said she loved how simple my life was, how I didn't care about fame or money. I wanted to believe her. We'd walk through the park on Sunday mornings, our hands brushing as leaves whispered around us. She'd tell me about her mother, who had passed away when she was little, and her father, who had grown distant since. I told her about my own mother gone when I was 8, and my father's way of burying pain under work. In those quiet talks, I thought I saw the truest version of her. When I proposed, it wasn't at a restaurant or some grand place. It was on a bridge overlooking the city lights. I didn't have a diamond ring, just a silver one, simple but mine. She cried, said yes, and kissed me like I was her only home. That night, I called my father to tell him the news. There was a pause on the line, then his steady voice, "You're sure about her?" "Yes, Dad. I've never been more sure of anything." "Then bring her to dinner tomorrow." I thought it was acceptance, but it wasn't. Dinner the next evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that carries unspoken questions. My father was polite but distant. Ruby was graceful but cautious. I could feel something shifting between them, a conversation happening in their eyes that I couldn't decode. When Ruby excused herself to take a call, my father leaned back in his chair. His expression softened, but his voice carried a strange heaviness. "Alex," he said, "you have a good heart. You trust easily. It's a strength, but also a danger." I frowned. "Dad, I love her." "I know she's not like us, but it's not about wealth," he interrupted gently. "It's about truth. Make sure she loves you, not the story of you." I wanted to argue, to defend Ruby, but the way he looked at me, calm, almost sorrowful, made me stop. He wasn't trying to control me. He was trying to warn me. I just didn't know why. The wedding plans moved quickly after that. Ruby wanted it small, elegant, private. My father offered to host it at our family estate, but she declined, said she wanted it somewhere neutral, where love would feel freer. I didn't see it as a red flag. I saw it as independence. But my father's silence grew louder with every passing day. He never said, "Don't marry her." He simply didn't bless the union. And when I told Ruby that my father wouldn't attend, she just smiled faintly and said, "Maybe it's better that way. Some people can't stand seeing love. They can't control." I didn't realize then how much truth hid behind her words. That night, before the wedding, my father called me. It was late. His voice was calm, almost tired. "Son," he said, "I've seen what you haven't. Don't be blind, because it feels good to be loved. You don't know her like I do." "Maybe not," he replied. "But I know what she's hiding, and you'll find out soon enough." He didn't elaborate. He didn't plead. He just said, "When the truth comes, remember that I tried to spare you from it." I hung up, angry, confused, but also afraid. Afraid that he might be right. Afraid that he wasn't. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain start again outside. Ruby texted me, "Can't wait to be yours forever." And I replied, "Always." I didn't know that forever would only last a few weeks. The morning after the wedding felt strange. Not bad, just different. The laughter of the guests had faded. The flowers were already beginning to wilt, and the house smelled faintly of perfume and candle wax. Ruby looked radiant as always, glowing skin, perfect smile, eyes full of something I couldn't quite read. We had chosen a small villa overlooking the ocean for our honeymoon. She loved the sea, said it made her feel free. I loved watching her there, her hair dancing with the wind, her laughter blending with the waves. For a while, it was peaceful, almost perfect. But perfection has a way of cracking when you try to hold it too tightly. It started with little things. The phone calls she took late at night, stepping onto the balcony while I pretended to sleep. The long silences that followed, her gaze fixed on something far away. The way she sometimes smiled at me, but her eyes didn't follow. At first I told myself it was just stress. New marriage, new home, new life. But deep down, there was a quiet ache forming. A whisper I couldn't ignore. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the balcony, I asked softly, "Ruby, Are you happy? She turned toward me, surprised. Of course I am. Why would you ask that? I shrugged. You just seem far away sometimes. She smiled that same polite, careful smile from the day we met. I'm just adjusting, Alex. You know, this is different for me. Different. That word stayed with me. Different from what? From comfort. From wealth. From whatever she left behind. When we returned to the city, things began to shift even more. Ruby insisted we move into a penthouse, something she said would be more suitable for her lifestyle. I hesitated, knowing it was far beyond my budget, but she reassured me that she'd handle it. You don't have to worry, Alex, she said, holding my face gently. You've worked hard enough. Let me take care of this part. I wanted to believe that love meant partnership, that her offer came from kindness, but there was something in her tone, a subtle mix of pity and control. My father came to visit once. He stood in the vast living room, his hands in his pockets, studying the expensive furniture and the silence between Ruby and me. Beautiful place, he said quietly. Ruby arranged most of it, I replied, forcing a smile. I can see that, he murmured. Before leaving, he looked at me and said something that chilled me more than I expected. Be careful when someone builds you a palace, Alex. Sometimes it's not to shelter you, it's to keep you where they can see you. I laughed it off, but the words stayed. Over time, Ruby became distant, not cold, just distracted. She was always attending charity events, luncheons, meetings I didn't know existed. When I asked, she said it was for her family's foundation. One night, I came home early from work. She wasn't there. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I sat on the couch, staring at the quiet apartment, the city lights flickering through the glass. When she finally came home, her eyes looked tired. Her lipstick smudged slightly. You're home early, she said, surprised. Where were you? I asked gently. She hesitated for a second, too long. With some old friends, she replied. You wouldn't know them. Her tone was calm, but the way she avoided my eyes, it was like a door, quietly closing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the balcony, the city buzzing below, and thought about my father's warning. He had said she was hiding something, but what could it be? She didn't seem cruel, just guarded. I thought maybe she was afraid of losing me, or maybe she had lost something long before I ever arrived. The next morning, as she showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message preview lit up the screen, just a name I didn't recognize, followed by words that twisted my stomach. He doesn't suspect a thing. Call me when you can. I didn't open the message. I couldn't. My hands were shaking. When she came out, smiling, wrapped in a towel, I pretended I hadn't seen it. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, I lied. Just thinking about work. And for the rest of the day, I thought about that message. He doesn't suspect a thing. A few days later, I visited my father. I hadn't seen him since the wedding. He was in his study, reading, the air heavy with old books and quiet judgment. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He just closed his book and waited. You were right, I said finally. Something's off. He nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting it. Have you asked her? No. I don't know what to say. Then don't ask, he said. Watch. The truth doesn't hide forever. I wanted him to tell me what he knew, but he didn't. He just stood, put a hand on my shoulder, and said softly, You'll see soon. And when you do, remember who you are. The next few weeks were a blur. Ruby grew busier, more distant. She started traveling for work, leaving me behind with vague explanations. When she was home, she was affectionate, overly so, almost like she was compensating for something. Then, one evening, she asked if I could help her with a financial document, something about an investment. When I looked at it, I froze. It wasn't a small deal. It was massive. A transfer of property from my father's company to one of her family's holdings. Why is my father's name on this? I asked carefully. Oh, it's just a joint venture, she said quickly. Your father's firm and ours have been working together for years. He approved it. But I knew my father. He never signed anything without involving me. Something didn't feel right. I excused myself, pretending I had a call, and took the document to my study. I called my father immediately. Dad, did you authorize a land transfer to the Haverford Group? No, he said flatly. Ruby says Ruby is lying. Alex's silence stretched between us. I told you, he said finally. She's hiding something. Now you've touched the edge of it. I felt dizzy, my chest tight. What do I do? You don't confront her yet, he said quietly. You let her show you who she really is. That night, Ruby came to bed late. She curled beside me, resting her head on my chest like nothing had happened. You're quiet tonight, she murmured. Just tired, I said. Her hand traced slow circles on my arm. You trust me, right? I looked at the ceiling, the weight of her question pressing against the silence. Of course, I whispered, but inside, something had broken. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I'd missed before, small clues that only make sense when the illusion starts to fade. Her phone always faced her sudden interest in my father's business. The way she changed the subject whenever I mentioned family or trust, it all began to connect, painfully, like shards of glass rearranging themselves into a picture I didn't want to see. Then, one afternoon, my father called me to his office. His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharper than ever. Alex, he said, I need to show you something. He handed me a folder. Inside were documents, emails, contracts, financial transfers. Ruby's name was on several of them. The pattern was clear. She'd been working with her family's corporation to gain control of one of my father's smaller companies. My name had been used, my marriage, my trust, to make it all look legitimate. I couldn't speak. How long have you known? I finally asked. Since before the wedding, he said. I tried to stop it without breaking you. I sat there in silence, the weight of betrayal pressing down like cold iron. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? He was right. I wouldn't have. That night, I went home and watched Ruby sleep. She looked peaceful, beautiful, the same woman I had fallen for, and yet she was a stranger. I wanted to wake her, demand answers, but I didn't. I just sat there, staring at her face in the dim light, remembering every word, every promise, every lie she'd woven so gently. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was sorrow. A quiet, aching kind of sorrow that doesn't scream, it just stays. In the morning, I told her I was going to visit my father for a few days. She smiled sweetly, kissed me goodbye, and told me to drive safe. But I didn't go to my father's. I went to the one place I thought she'd feel safest to lie her family's estate. And what I found there would change everything. I still remember the way the morning light hit the gates of Ruby's family estate. Tall, iron, perfect, and cold. It was the kind of place that told stories without words, stories of power, secrets, and everything money could buy. The guard recognized me immediately. Mr. Alex, he said, opening the gates with a polite nod. Miss Ruby isn't home right now. I lied easily. Her father asked me to pick something up. He hesitated, but let me in. The house was quiet, too quiet. I walked through hallways lined with portraits, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and faint perfume. Ruby's study was upstairs. She had told me once that it was where she kept her personal things. I remember her saying it with a faint smile, one I didn't understand then. When I opened the door, the truth was waiting for me, neatly arranged on her desk. There were files, contracts, and a folder labeled Mica Project. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity had already won. Inside were documents linking my father's company to hers, timelines, transfers, signatures I'd never seen before. And then, in the middle of it all, a letter, my name written in her delicate handwriting. I unfolded it slowly. Alex, if you're reading this, it means everything has fallen apart. I want you to know that what began as business became love. Your father knew who I was before you did. He knew why I was there. My family wanted control of his company, and they thought the easiest way in was through you. My heart stopped. I agreed at first. I told myself it was harmless. Just conversations, connections, trust. But then, I met you, and everything changed. You made me remember what honesty feels like, and that's why I couldn't tell you the truth. I was afraid you'd see me the way I saw myself. A liar, a pawn. I'm sorry. The last line was written shakily. You deserved love that didn't start with a lie. I stood there, letter trembling in my hands, the sound of the sea faint in the distance. Every breath felt heavier than the last. I didn't know how long I stood there. Eventually, I heard a voice behind me, deep, calm, familiar. You weren't supposed to find it that way. I turned. It was my father. He stepped into the room, his expression unreadable, though his eyes carried something softer, maybe pity, maybe sorrow. You knew, I said quietly. You knew everything. He nodded once. I did. And you didn't stop her? Would you have listened if I had? I swallowed hard. You could have told me. And what would that have changed, Alex? His tone wasn't sharp, just tired. You needed to see her truth, not mine. If I had exposed her, you would have hated me, not her. He walked closer, his steps echoing softly on the wooden floor. Sometimes, he said, a man must fall on his own to understand the ground beneath him. Anger mixed with heartbreak. So you let me walk into this. No, he replied quietly. I stood nearby, hoping you'd find your way out. He handed me another envelope, this one smaller, sealed with my father's handwriting. Read this when you're ready, he said, and turned to leave. But before he did, he added one more line. She loves you, Alex, in her way. That's the tragedy of it. And then he was gone. I sat in the empty study for a long time, listening to the clock tick. The house felt colder now. Even the air seemed to retreat from me. When I finally opened the envelope from my father, I found a single sheet of paper. Son, when you love someone who lives behind walls, you have two choices: break them down and risk being crushed, or walk away and keep your soul intact. I built my life on deals and power, and I learned that not all contracts are written on paper. Some are written in silence, and they cost the most. I didn't stop your marriage because I wanted you to learn what wealth can't protect your heart. Below it, he'd signed simply, Micah. That evening, I drove back home. Ruby was there, sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly together. When she saw me, her eyes widened, a mix of fear and relief. Alex, you went to my house. I didn't answer right away. I just placed her letter on the table between us. She looked at it, then at me, her lips trembling. You weren't supposed to see that, but I did. Tears filled her eyes. I was going to tell you. I just couldn't. I asked softly. She nodded. The silence between us was heavy, like two oceans meeting in the dark. At first, she whispered, it was just business. My father said your family was a stepping stone. I told myself it didn't matter, that love wasn't real anyway. But then you made me believe again. She looked up, her voice breaking. Every day with you felt like a lie. I didn't want to stop telling. I should have been angry. I should have shouted. But I didn't, because behind her tears, I saw the woman who had once laughed with me in the rain. Did you ever love me? I asked quietly. She nodded, sobbing. More than I thought I could. But I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, you'd never look at me the same. I sighed, sitting across from her. The pain was sharp, but beneath it was understanding. You were right, I said. I don't see you the same. But that doesn't mean I don't see you at all. The next few days felt like walking through fog. We didn't fight. We didn't even talk much. She stayed mostly in her room. I stayed in mine. The house felt too big for two people who no longer knew where to stand. My father visited once. Ruby couldn't face him. He didn't ask her to. He simply placed a hand on my shoulder and said, sometimes forgiveness is the quietest form of revenge. I didn't understand then, but I would. A week later, Ruby left. No dramatic goodbyes, no angry words, just a note on the kitchen counter. I'll always love you, even if I don't deserve to. And beneath it, the ring I'd given her, the silver one from the bridge. I sat there for a long time, staring at it. Then, quietly, I picked it up, closed my hand around it, and whispered, Goodbye, Ruby. Months passed. The papers were signed. The marriage was annulled quietly, without media attention. People whispered, of course, as they always do, but I stopped listening. I returned to work, spent more time with my father. For the first time in years, we talked, really talked. He never said, I told you so. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, I asked him, Did you ever regret not warning me harder? He smiled faintly. No, because if I had saved you from the pain, I would have also saved you from the wisdom that came after. I nodded slowly. Do you think she loved me? Yes, he said. But love built on lies can't stay standing. It eventually collapses under its own weight. His words lingered in the crackling quiet, warm and painful all at once. Time softened the edges of the wound. I began to understand what my father had really done. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd let life teach me what comfort never could. And Ruby became a memory I didn't hate, just one I carried carefully, like an old photograph of a place that once felt like home. 1 year later, I received a letter. No return address, just my name. Inside was a short note written in Ruby's handwriting. I'm rebuilding my life far from the noise. I've learned that love can't be built on gain. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you found peace. I folded it gently, smiled faintly, and tucked it into the drawer beside my father's old letter. 2 truths from 2 people who had both loved me in their own broken, complicated ways. That night, as I looked out over the city lights, I realized something. Sometimes the greatest lessons don't come from being loved, they come from being betrayed by someone who once did. The evening after I learned the truth felt unlike any other. The city outside my window glowed faintly, lights twinkling in rows, like stars that had lost their way and decided to settle on Earth. I sat there for hours, just breathing, trying to make sense of what my life had turned into. Ruby's words still echoed in my mind, the confession, the tears, the way her voice cracked when she said she never meant to fall for me, and my father's quiet sigh, the weight of his silence. It was as though the entire world had spoken in one night, and I was left with nothing but the sound of my own heart, breaking softly inside me. I didn't call anyone. I didn't shout. I didn't even cry. I just sat there, feeling the truth settle into me, cold, but strangely clarifying. When dawn came, I drove to my father's estate. The air smelled of dew and old roses. The guards nodded as I passed. They must have known I'd come. Micah was in his usual place, the garden bench under the oak tree. His newspaper beside him, a steaming cup of black coffee, untouched. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just said, softly, "You found out." I nodded. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask what Ruby had told me. Maybe he didn't need to. He already knew. For a long time, we didn't speak. The silence between us wasn't angry anymore. It was tender, like to people who had both been wounded and finally understood why. "You were right," I said quietly. "She used me, at least at first." "And later?" he asked, turning slightly, his eyes unreadable. "Later, I think she wanted to love me. But maybe love built on lies never survives." Micah nodded once, a slow, heavy nod that seemed to carry years of knowing. "That's the hardest kind," he said. "When love starts wrong but feels real." I sat beside him, the morning breeze rustling through the trees. For the first time, I saw him not as a cold, distant billionaire, but as a man who had once been betrayed to. His silence wasn't pride. It was empathy, a language of protection. "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally asked. "Why let me walk into it blind?" "Because," he said gently, "you wouldn't have believed me. And I didn't want to take away your chance to see love for yourself, even if it meant watching you fall." That broke something in me, not in pain, but in realization. He had trusted me enough to let me fail. We sat there a long time. No lectures, no anger, no talk about money or shame. Just two men, bound by blood and mistakes, finding quiet peace in understanding. Later that day, Ruby came to see me. She stood at the doorway, pale and fragile, as if afraid the air itself might reject her. Her hands trembled when she spoke. "Alex, I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "But I need you to know I never planned for it to go this far. Your father, he offered me a job once. He told me he believed in me. But when I fell in love with you, I thought." She stopped. Her voice broke. I could see she was fighting for words, the kind that never come when guilt sits heavy in your chest. "Ruby," I said softly, "I don't hate you." She looked up, her eyes wet, confused. "You don't?" "No. Hate means I still want something from you. But I don't. I just want peace." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You really are your father's son," she whispered. And then, without another word, she left. When the door closed behind her, I felt a strange calm. No anger, no revenge. Just release. In the weeks that followed, life became quiet again. I went back to work, small projects, simple routines. I started walking in the evenings, thinking less, feeling more. Sometimes my father would join me, both of us talking about ordinary things, the weather, the stock market, a movie we'd seen. He never mentioned Ruby again, and neither did I. Some stories we both knew didn't need retelling, but something in me changed. I stopped chasing things that sparkled. I began to notice what stayed steady: kindness, honesty, silence. And I realized what love truly means: Not perfection, not wealth, not beauty, but truth, even when it hurts. It's been 3 years since that day. 3 years since the wedding that never happened, since the truth that shattered the version of love I once believed in. And yet, I've never felt more at peace. Sometimes I visit the same garden where my father and I sat under the oak tree. The bench is still there, a little older, a little worn. The roses bloom differently now, fewer in number, but stronger, deeper in color. Maybe that's what healing does. It doesn't make you new again. It just makes what remains. Real Ruby moved away. I heard she started a small business somewhere quiet, away from the city. I hope she found the peace she was chasing, the kind that doesn't come from money or admiration, but from forgiveness, the kind you give yourself. I never called her again, not out of pride, but because sometimes love deserves to rest, not be dragged through more pain. My father and I talk often now. We still don't use many words, we never have, but there's warmth where there used to be walls. He asks about my work, my life, and sometimes he tells me stories from his past, the ones he never shared when I was young. It's strange, isn't it? How loss opens doors we never thought we'd walk through. One evening, while we watched the sunset from his porch, he said something that stayed with me. You know, Alex, I didn't stay silent because I wanted you to hurt. I stayed silent because love, real love, must be seen. And sometimes the only way to see clearly is through the tears. I smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile you wear to hide pain. It was the kind that comes when you finally understand he had been my quiet guardian all along. His refusal to bless the marriage wasn't punishment. It was love, in its hardest form, protection wrapped in disappointment. Now, when I look back, I don't see a tragedy. I see a journey, one that taught me how fragile love can be when built on illusion, and how strong it becomes when anchored in truth. If you asked me what I learned, I'd tell you this. Sometimes, the people who stand against us aren't our enemies. They're the ones who see what we can't. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than warning. And sometimes, heartbreak isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of wisdom. I no longer chase perfection. I no longer confuse wealth with worth. I live simply. I wake early. I call my father often. I water the small plant by my window and find peace in watching it grow slow, honest, and real. And maybe, one day, if love finds me again, I'll welcome it differently. Not with blind hope, but with open eyes. Not with promises, but with truth. Because I've learned that love, without honesty, is just a performance. Beautiful, but hollow. When I tell this story, people often ask me if I regret it all, if I wish I'd listened to my father from the start. I tell them no, because some lessons you can't borrow. You have to live them. You have to walk through the fire to understand warmth. And now, every time I pass by that oak tree where my father sat waiting, where truth met silence, I whisper a quiet thank you, not for the pain, but for the way it taught me to see, because in the end, wealth can't measure the worth of love. Only truth can.